Today's lesson is the odd and unexpected consequences of climate change. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to continue talking about climate change. Most of the time we talk about climate change in terms of rising temperatures, increased instances of wildfires and rising sea levels, but there are other things that are happening as a result of climate change, and we talked about some of them last time. We've got mosquitoes on the move. As if we don't have enough problems, we're now having diseases like dengue fever and malaria spreading more rapidly because of climate change. And we also talked about increased turbulence in the skies. So the next time you fly to Europe or the United States or whatever, you can expect to have a bumpy ride.
That's right. Make sure your seatbelt is fastened at all times, as long as you're not standing up or walking around in the plane. That turbulence can be rather severe, and as we learned, it can come out of the blue, literally out of the blue, meaning in a nice clear blue sky, the plane's flying along, no bad weather anywhere nearby, and all of a sudden this turbulence occurs. I think scientists are still trying to figure out why it's so frequent, why it's so violent, and detecting it, sort of having radar and whatnot in the planes to find this turbulence and allow the pilots to fly around it to avoid it. That technology isn't really there because turbulence like this, clear air turbulence as they call it, is quite new and quite hard to figure out. So that's something to worry about. Today we have a few other interesting and unusual effects of climate change. We're going to be looking at some lizards, some goats, and also how climate change might affect your sleep and your allergies. I think the last one, the allergies, I can kind of understand, but I'm very curious about how climate change can affect lizards and goats. So that's the first part of our article. Let's check it out.
Lady lizards and shrinking goats. Climate breakdown is also having odd effects in the animal world. For example, because of their effects on bearded dragon eggs, higher temperatures are causing greater numbers of female bearded dragons to hatch in Australia. In Italy, meanwhile, goats in the Alps are shrinking because of reduced feeding and increased resting during hot periods. Male coqui frogs in Puerto Rico are also getting smaller, causing them to croak at higher pitches.
大家好，第一部分介绍名词 lizard， 它的意思是蜥蜴。例如 The lizard ran up the side of the building until it was out of sight. 那只蜥蜴沿着建筑物的一侧跑上去，直到它消失在视线之外。或者 Near the lake, the boy found a small lizard lying on a rock in the sun. 在湖边，那位男孩发现一只小蜥蜴躺在阳光下的岩石上。接着看到 breakdown 这个单字，它是名词，表示崩溃，也可以是故障或是毛病的意思。例如 The sudden breakdown of the computer system caused a lot of trouble in the office. 电脑系统突然的崩溃，给办公室带来了很多麻烦。或是 A breakdown in communication led to the project's failure. 沟通上的破裂导致了该专案的失败。
Okay, so the first part of our article today is all about lady lizards and shrinking goats. Okay, this is basically talking about how climate change is affecting wildlife, how it's affecting various creatures in different parts of the world. So we've got lady lizards and we've got goats that are shrinking. Remember, goats are those creatures that basically eat anything and they like to climb on rocks. Okay, so here it begins by saying climate breakdown is also having odd effects in the animal world. Okay, so climate breakdown. Here, breakdown does not refer to getting up and starting to dance. Hey, break down. Let's start dancing. Let's start rapping or whatever. But in this particular case, it's just talking about bad changes in the climate. Okay, things are getting hotter and we've got different kinds of weather patterns. So it's having odd effects in the animal world. Lots of animals are affected by climate change.
Exactly right. Machines, of course, can break down if your car breaks down or if you have a break break down on the highway, you'll have to call a tow truck to get your car over to a garage to fix it. But we can also use it just when things aren't working right, when something is going badly wrong. So we could have a relationship breakdown if you're going through a divorce or something. You might say, oh, I'm having a relationship breakdown. An emotional or personal breakdown might mean that the effects of stress in your life and worry and all sorts of troubles is causing you to have emotional outbursts and having trouble dealing with things the way you normally would. So the climate is kind of breaking down. It's kind of being affected in a lot of negative ways and causing a lot of negative side effects and consequences. So let's look at this. It says, for example, because of their effects on bearded dragon eggs, higher temperatures are causing greater numbers of female bearded dragons to hatch in Australia. Very, very interesting. So the type of the species of lizard that we're talking about here is the bearded dragon. It's a scary name, but it's a pretty normal looking lizard. I think people keep these as pets. They're called that, the bearded dragon, because of course they're lizards. They're dragon-like in their appearance. And they also have that little fringe that kind of hangs from their lower jaw that sort of looks like a beard, a man's hairy beard. This is, of course, the lizard's beard, but even the females have beards in this species. Higher temperatures, it says, warmer weather are causing greater numbers of female bearded dragons to hatch in Australia. I think this is not too strange for animals born from eggs. Of course, lizards being reptiles are born in eggs, and the temperature, the surrounding ambient environmental temperature, can affect the sex of the baby that comes out of the egg. I guess warmer temperatures lead to more females being born, cooler temperatures lead to more males being born. So the higher temperatures are causing the statistics, the population of the bearded dragon, to skew or to kind of swing more to the female side. So that's interesting. But of course, if that goes on, it could lead to lower numbers because, of course, if there's a lot of females around and very few males to mate with, the population of the bearded dragon will go down. So that's a very interesting, maybe not as important as turbulence and malaria, but certainly a very interesting and in some ways worrying effect of climate change. Then we'll go to Italy, where the goats are getting smaller.
Evidently, remember, Italy is in southern Europe, and in the northern area of Italy, we have the Alps, which is the mountain range in central Europe there. I guess it's bordered, or the Alps are in Italy and Germany and Austria and places like that. So in Italy, we've got goats in the Alps, and they are shrinking because of reduced feeding and increased resting during hot periods. Okay, so the goats are getting smaller. They are getting fed less and less because climate change is probably affecting all the plants in the mountains, and they have fewer things to eat, and therefore they are shrinking. They're getting smaller, and then they're resting for longer periods as well because it's just so darn hot. What can you do when it's just so hot outside, but crawl under a tree in the shade and take a pleasant little nap?
All right, so more relaxing but less eating leads to smaller goats. Of course, the goats aren't shrinking in their lifetime, right? We don't have goats that are born big and then get smaller as they age. But if we look at generations of goats going back 5-10 years, they'll notice that the goats are just generally smaller because of, yes, this changed lifestyle. Less food, more rest, smaller goats. Now let's move to Puerto Rico, where the frogs are becoming sopranos. Male coqui frogs in Puerto Rico are getting smaller, causing them to croak at higher pitches. I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's also worrying at the same time. But as certainly an effect of climate change, this is kind of unexpected. Frogs in Puerto Rico are getting smaller, this breed of frogs, the coqui frog, and their reduced size means that their mouths and throats, I guess, are getting smaller, and this is causing them to croak, ribbit, at higher pitches. That noise that frogs make, we can call that a croak. We can sort of recreate the sound by saying ribbit, R-I-B-B-I-T. That's the common sort of English way of recreating or copying the sound of a frog. So 20 years ago it was ribbit, now it's ribbit, or something like that. They're croaking, they're making their calls and their sounds at higher pitches. It basically sounds like a higher note. And I think that's the same with the human voice, right? Male voices are lower because our vocal cords are are longer. Female voices are higher because their vocal cords are shorter. So generally, smaller voice boxes and throats and things like that makes a higher sound. So we might talk at a higher sound. Frogs might croak at a higher sound. And just generally smaller frogs mean higher pitches or the higher note in the sound of their croaks.
Yep, it's interesting. And also, the word croak is a slang word for to die.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, my
yes,
goodness. My grandfather croaked last week. Of course, that's kind of a bad way to say that. It's kind of informal. Don't ever say it that way. But it is a slang word for dying. But again, this is the sound that frogs make. They croak, or as Mike just said, they ribbit. And of course, as you know, there are different kinds of frogs in Taiwan here that make all sorts of different sounds. Maybe their singing voices are changing too. Let's move on now to the next part here and talking about sleepless nights. It's so hard to get to sleep, and we are also getting more allergies as a result of climate change. Let's listen.
Sleepless nights and awful allergies. Closer to home, our nighttime routines are being affected. As anyone who has spent a hot night tossing and turning knows, warm weather disrupts sleep. In fact, scientists estimate that people could lose up to 58 hours of sleep per year by 2100 due to hot nights. Hotter temperatures are also bad news for allergy sufferers, as they mean earlier and longer pollen seasons. Since 1990, 20 extra days have been added to the annual allergy season.
第二部分看到动词 disrupt， 它的意思是扰乱、中断或是打断。例如 A major storm is expected to disrupt air travel throughout the region. 预计一场大风暴将会扰乱该地区的航空旅行。也可以说 Our travel plans were disrupted by the typhoon. 我们的旅行计划被台风打乱了。另外补充这个字的名词 disruption， D-I-S-R-U-P-T-I-O-N disruption， 表示扰乱、中断或是颠覆的意思。举例来说 An accident on the highway caused a major disruption of traffic during rush hour. 在尖峰时段，高速公路上的一起事故导致交通严重中断。或是 There were disruptions to the subway system this morning. 今天早上地铁系统出现了中断。再来介绍动词 estimate， 表示估量、估计或是评估。我们可以说 The project manager estimated that the construction would be completed by the end of the year. 专案经理估量这项工程会在年底前完成。又或者说 The doctor estimated that the wound would be fully healed in 2 weeks. 医生估计这个伤口要2周才会完全愈合。下一个看到名词 pollen， 它的意思是花粉。例如 In the spring and summer, many people suffer from allergies because that's when the pollen count tends to be the highest. 在春季和夏季，许多人患有过敏症，因为那是花粉数量最多的时候。又或者说 Bees collect pollen from flowers to make honey. 蜜蜂从花中采集花粉制作蜂蜜。
All right, so for the final look at some of the interesting effects of climate change, we're moving on to sleepless nights and awful allergies. Okay, so this is another one we should pay attention to. Clearly, female lizards, shrinking goats, and higher croaking frogs are interesting and a little worrying, but don't really affect human life. But sleepless nights and awful allergies could really affect our lives. So what's going on here? It says closer to home, our nighttime routines are being affected. Okay, yeah. So we're bringing it closer to home. That doesn't mean closer to Taiwan or Taipei or wherever you live. When we say bringing it closer to home, meaning it has a more direct effect on your life, on your daily life. Okay, so if we talk about international news and international politics, that might be interesting. And of course, it's good to know about. It's important stuff. But when we talk about the economy or local politics, that's, news that's closer to home. It has a more direct effect on your daily life. you, your family, and the community you live in. So yeah, closer to home, having a more direct effect on us humans, our nighttime routines are being affected. Okay, nighttime, just things that happen at night. And your nighttime routine is kind of how you might get ready for bed. Your nighttime routine would be slightly different probably from other people, but similar in many ways. Take a shower, brush your teeth, read a book, look at your phone, maybe listen to some relaxing music, drink some warm milk, the things that you do in order to get ready for bed, to get ready to sleep. So nighttime routines are being affected by climate change. How is that happening?
Yeah, it's interesting. And here it says, as anyone who has spent a hot night tossing and turning knows, warm weather disrupts sleep. Now, most of us, of course, here in Taiwan probably just go ahead and turn on the AC at night and sleep in the cool comfort of an air-conditioned room, although electric rates are higher during the summer, so we're going to have to pay for it. But in any case here, some people may not have the money to pay higher electric bills, and they're going to spend the night tossing and turning, which is a term we use for people when they really can't get to sleep because you're laying in one position and you change your position and you just change all the time because you just can't get comfortable. It's just so hot. You took a shower, but that didn't do you any good. You're already sweating like a pig. So here, tossing and turning doesn't do you any good, and as a result, warm weather disrupts sleep. So here the verb to disrupt just means to interrupt. You just can't sleep. You need to sleep because you need to go to school or work the next day, but you just can't sleep because it's so darn hot.
And they've actually come up with some interesting numbers to show this to us, to quantify this. In fact, it says scientists estimate that people could lose up to 58 hours of sleep per year by 2100 due to hot nights. All right, so this is something scientists have done some number crunching on, but of course it's hard to know exactly how much sleep people around the world are getting. This isn't data that's easy to amass and to collect and to study, but so scientists are estimating this. An estimate, I should say, to use it as a noun, is basically an educated guess. So you have some data. This is data that you know is true and factual, but it doesn't really give you the full picture, but it does give you a good idea of the trends of how things are changing. And so you're basically taking that data and saying, well, it's changed this much in 20 years. If we try to guess the next 40 or 50 years, and it kind of goes along the same, then we can reach a guess, an estimate. We can estimate what will be happening in the future. Notice that estimate, the noun form, and estimate, the verb form, do have that different sound on the A. Scientists estimate that people could lose up to 58 hours of sleep per year by 2100, so in about 75 years, due to hot nights. So basically, it's getting harder and harder to sleep. People are going to have to find the money to buy air conditioners. And I think the problem also is that air conditioners create their own heat, don't they? And they use power. So that's going to cause maybe more global warming as people try to have a cool bedroom because, yeah, it's hard to sleep when it's so hot.
It's a vicious cycle indeed, and you'd have to do your mathematics there to determine how much sleep you would lose per night. You'll probably lose a certain amount of time of sleep every night because of those hot nights, and hotter temperatures are also bad news for allergy sufferers as they mean earlier and longer pollen seasons. Pollen, of course, is like the powder that comes from flowers. A lot of people are allergic to pollen. Yeah, I'm allergic to pollen. That's how you would say that. Or I have an allergy. And so here the pollen seasons start earlier and end later. So you have to suffer with that allergy for a longer period of time.
But this could get worse. Since 1990, 20 extra days have been added to the annual allergy season. The spring is starting a little bit earlier and lasting longer, giving flowers more chance to release that pollen in the air, which is nice. It's food for bees and creates more flowers. But for a hay fever sufferer, for someone with an allergy, it can be hell. Now it's 20 more days of hell. Good gosh. All right, let's have a look at the last part of our article before we wrap things up.
So, as the headlines scream about floods and fires, climate change is quietly transforming our world in more surprising ways. But like those more obvious effects, these smaller impacts also pose challenges to human health, wildlife, and industry.
第三部分，我们看到 impact 这个单字，它是名词，指的是影响、作用，也可以是冲击的意思。我们可以说 The movie was a huge hit and had a major impact on fans in many different countries. 那部电影大获成功，并且对许多不同国家的影迷有重大的影响。或是 The environmental impact of pollution on marine life is alarming. 污染对海洋生物的环境影响令人担忧。
Okay, the last paragraph sums up our article. It says, so as the headlines scream about floods and fires, as we get news stories about these disasters going on all the time, they scream about them. They let us know for sure that we understand climate change is quietly transforming or changing our world in more surprising ways. But like those more obvious effects, like those wildfires and those increased temperatures, these smaller impacts, these smaller effects or results are also posing challenges to human health, wildlife, and industry. So again, we've got these other impacts. We mentioned all those different animals being affected. We increased allergies, etc., etc. All these things are impacting our lives, and so they pose challenges to our health, to wildlife, the wild animals in the world, and to industry, companies that produce things. And yes, indeed, it will probably affect our jobs, and we probably won't make as much money as we used to.
Absolutely, that could be an effect. And of course, we'll be lying in bed, sweaty and hot in the middle of the night, worrying about things like that. All right, well, now's not the time to worry. Now's the time to go over to Hanny. So let's do that, and then we'll be back with our discussion starter question.
Hello， 各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第二部分有一句提到温暖的天气会扰乱睡眠，文中是用 disrupt 这个动词来表达扰乱。我们来学它的字首字根。 RUPT 这个字根啊，它表示破裂、断裂、打破。有这个字根的字大多带有突然被介入啊，或是打破原本规律的含义。那么在 disrupt 这个字当中，字首 dis 表示分离， rupt 表示断裂打断，那合在一起 disrupt 它具有扰乱、中断、打断的意思。我们顺便补充两个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 corrupt， 它的字首 cor 是来自 com， 有强调作用。那么字根 rupt 表示破裂，当所有的事物全部都崩坏分离了，也许就可以联想到 corrupt 它有败坏啊、腐化的意思。那它当形容词还可以描述是贪污的、腐败的、道德败坏的，当动词可以表达使堕落、腐化、腐败。好，第二个补充的是 erupt， 它的字首 e 表示向外， rupt 表示破裂。当爆炸的时候就会有东西破裂嘛，会有很多的碎屑向外喷发，所以应该很容易可以联想到 erupt 它有喷发、爆发的意思。好，课文接着提到说，科学家估计到2100年，由于夜晚炎热，人们一年可能会少睡58个小时。文中他用到 up to 58 hours of sleep， 这可以表达多达58小时的睡眠。那么 up to 就是指多达、高达，后面常常会接表示数字啊、数量等等的名词。举例来说， The meeting room can hold up to 50 people， 那间会议室能容纳多达50人。好，那这边也补充一下 up to 的其他用法。第一种，我们用事物当主词的时候， something be up to somebody 是表达什么什么是某人的责任，什么什么由某人来决定。像 it's up to you 就可以表达由你决定，你决定就好。第二个，用人当主词的话， somebody be up to 加上名词或动名词会有两种意思。第一种意思是表达某人有能力做某事，有能力去处理、执行某事。例如 Do you think they are up to the challenge？ 你认为他们有办法应付那个挑战吗？好，那另外一个意思则是表达某人在计划某事啊，偷偷做某事，尤其是不好的事。像有一个用语叫 up to no good， 就可以表达图谋不轨的意思哦。好，第三个补充的用法 up to 可以表达跟 until 差不多的语义，像 up to yesterday 直到昨天， up to this point 到此刻为止，到目前为止。好，那么以上今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天单字吧。
Disrupt. The storm disrupted power supplies throughout the region. Estimate. It was difficult to estimate the number of people at the event. Annual. The park is famous for its annual flower festival. Transform. Exercise and a healthy diet can transform your body and mind. Impact. Dana's speech had a strong impact on the audience. Wildlife. Wildlife photography requires patience and a good eye for detail.
Discussion starter starts now!
Here's our discussion starter question. The question is, which of the consequences of climate change mentioned in the article seems the strangest to you and why?
Well, I don't know about now, because now I know about it, but in my opinion, the strangest consequence mentioned is that frogs have higher pitches in their croaks. This was the frog, I believe, from Puerto Rico. So that's quite surprising, since I didn't know that the frog's size would affect its croak. And I'm also wondering, since many frogs croak, are there other frogs that are going to be singing going from a tenor to an alto or an alto to a soprano as their voices get higher, their croaks get higher? That's quite an interesting and unusual effect of climate change.
Yeah, maybe it will affect bird chirps as well. Who knows? But I find the consequence of increased air turbulence to be the strangest. It makes sense to me now, but I didn't think that it would affect things that high in the atmosphere. I thought that climate change only affected things close to the ground.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger.
See you next time.